1881, Constantinople, the capital of the Ottoman Empire. For 600 years, the Ottomans ruled one of the most powerful empires on earth. At their peak, they controlled 3 continents: Europe, Asia, Africa, 29 provinces, 35 million people. An empire that stretched from Budapest to Baghdad, from Algiers to the Persian Gulf. An empire that defeated crusader armies, conquered Constantinople, and threatened the gates of Vienna. But in 1881, that empire surrendered. Not to an invading army, not to a revolution, to debt. The Ottoman Empire defaulted on its loans and handed financial control to European bankers. Britain, France, Germany, Austria, and Italy created the Ottoman Public Debt Administration, a council of foreign bankers who now controlled Ottoman tax collection. Foreign bureaucrats sat in Constantinople and decided how Ottoman revenue would be spent. The Sultan was still on the throne. The empire still existed on paper. But the real power, the financial power, belonged to European creditors. And within 40 years, the Ottoman Empire was gone, dismantled, carved up, erased from the map, not by bullets, by debt. Britain destroyed a 600-year empire without firing a shot. They just lent money, then collected interest, then took control when the payments stopped. And the blueprint they used in 1881 is the same system being used today. The IMF does it. The World Bank does it. China does it with Belt and Road. Lend to countries that can't repay. Wait for the default, then take control of ports, infrastructure, resources, and sovereignty. This is financial colonialism, and it started with the Ottoman Empire. If you want to understand how debt is used as a weapon, how empires are really built and destroyed, and how the modern global financial system extracts wealth from entire nations, you're in the right place. This is The Wealth Records, where we break down the strategies and systems that shape power and wealth on a global scale. Hit subscribe, drop a like, and share this, because what you're about to learn connects 600 years of history to what's happening right now in 2025. Let's dive in. The Ottoman Empire was founded in 1299 by Osman I, a Turkish tribal leader in Anatolia. For the next 600 years, the Ottomans expanded relentlessly. They conquered the Byzantine Empire in 1453, taking Constantinople and renaming it Istanbul. They pushed into Europe, conquering the Balkans, Hungary, and reaching the gates of Vienna twice. They controlled the Holy Land, Mecca, Medina, Egypt, and North Africa. At their peak in the 1500s, under Suleiman the Magnificent, the Ottomans were the richest and most powerful empire on earth. Wealthier than Spain, more feared than France, more advanced than England, they controlled the trade routes between East and West. Spices, silk, gold, everything flowed through Ottoman territory. The empire was self-sufficient. They produced their own food, manufactured their own goods, and minted their own currency. They didn't need Europe. Europe needed them. But by the 1800s, things had changed. Europe had industrialized. Britain had factories, railroads, and steamships. France had modern armies. Germany was unifying and militarizing. The Ottomans were still using old systems, old technology, old military tactics. They were falling behind, and the sultans knew it. They needed to modernize, fast, build railroads, upgrade the military, industrialize the economy, create a modern bureaucracy. But modernization costs money, massive amounts of money, and the Ottomans didn't have it. Their tax system was inefficient, their economy was stagnant, they couldn't fund modernization from internal revenue. So they did what seemed logical at the time: they borrowed from Europe. The first major Ottoman loan came in 1854 during the Crimean War. The Ottomans were fighting Russia. Britain and France were allies, helping the Ottomans because they wanted to contain Russian expansion. But the war was expensive. The Ottoman treasury was empty, so British and French banks offered a solution: a loan, £3 million at 6% interest. The Ottomans took it. They won the war. And they learned a dangerous lesson. European loans solve immediate problems. The debt comes later, and later always comes. Between 1854 and 1875, the Ottoman Empire took 15 major loans from European banks. The amounts grew larger each time. The terms got worse. The first loan was £3 million at 6% interest. By the 1870s, they were borrowing tens of millions at interest rates above 10%. And here's the key. The Ottomans weren't borrowing to invest in productive assets that would generate revenue to repay the loans. They were borrowing to cover budget deficits, fund wars, and pay off previous loans. This is the debt spiral: borrow to pay old debt. The new debt is bigger than the old debt because it includes interest, so you borrow again. Bigger amounts, higher interest. The hole gets deeper, and the creditors know exactly what they're doing. They're not stupid. They know the Ottomans can't repay. That's the point. By 1875, the Ottoman Empire owed over £200 million to European creditors. Their annual revenue was around £20 million. They owed 10 times their annual income. There was no mathematical way to repay this. The interest alone was £15 million per year. They couldn't even cover the interest, let alone the principal. In October 1875, the Ottoman government announced it could only pay half of the interest due, a partial default. The European creditors panicked, not because they were losing money, because they hadn't yet seized control. A default was the trigger, the excuse, the legal justification to take over. Let me show you what happened in Egypt first, because Egypt was the trial run. Egypt was technically part of the Ottoman Empire, but operated semi-independently under Khedive Ismail. In the 1860s, Egypt borrowed heavily from European banks to build infrastructure, including the Suez Canal. The canal opened in 1869. It was a massive engineering achievement. It connected the Mediterranean to the Red Sea, cutting weeks off the shipping route from Europe to Asia. Strategically, it was the most valuable piece of infrastructure on Earth, and Egypt owned it, or they thought they did. By 1875, Egypt was bankrupt. They couldn't pay their debts. The Khedive was desperate for cash. The British Prime Minister, Benjamin Disraeli, saw an opportunity. Egypt owned 44% of the Suez Canal shares. Disraeli bought them, all of them, for £4 million. He arranged the financing through the Rothschild banking house, got the deal done in days, and presented it to Queen Victoria as a fait accompli. Britain now controlled the most strategic trade route in the world, not through war, through a distressed asset purchase. Egypt was too broke to say no, but Britain didn't stop there. In 1876, Britain and France established the dual control system in Egypt. European financial controllers now managed Egyptian tax collection and government spending. The Khedive was still in power, but Europeans controlled the money. When Egyptians revolted against foreign control in 1882, Britain invaded, occupied Egypt, and turned it into a de facto colony. All of this started with debt. Loans led to default. Default led to financial control. Financial control led to political control. This was the blueprint, and it was about to be applied to the entire Ottoman Empire. In 1881, the Ottoman Empire officially defaulted on its debts. The Sultan declared he could not pay. European creditors demanded restitution, not in cash, in control. In December 1881, the Ottoman government signed the Muharrem Decree, creating the Ottoman Public Debt Administration. This was an unprecedented surrender of sovereignty. The OPDA was a council of European bondholders, representatives from Britain, France, Germany, Austria, Hungary, Italy, and the Ottoman Empire itself. But the Ottomans were outnumbered. The Europeans controlled the council, and the council controlled Ottoman finances. The OPDA was given direct authority to collect specific Ottoman taxes: tobacco taxes, salt taxes, alcohol taxes, silk taxes, fishing taxes, stamp taxes. They controlled the revenue streams and allocated them to debt repayment. The Ottomans collected the taxes, but the money went straight to European creditors. The Sultan couldn't spend it. The OPDA employed thousands of European bureaucrats who sat in Constantinople and throughout the empire, collecting money and sending it to Paris, London, Berlin, and Vienna. This was financial colonization without military occupation. The Ottoman Empire still existed. The Sultan still sat on the throne, but the empire no longer controlled its own finances. Every major financial decision required European approval. Want to build a railroad? Europeans decide. Want to reform the tax system? Europeans decide. Want to increase spending on the military? Europeans decide. And they always decided in favor of debt repayment. The empire was a debt slave, and Britain was the largest creditor. Britain held the most bonds. Britain had the most representatives on the OPDA. Britain controlled the empire without conquering it. By the early 1900s, the Ottoman Empire was called the sick man of Europe. Weak, declining, dying. European powers were already planning how to divide it up when it finally collapsed. And when World War I started in 1914, the Ottomans faced a choice. Side with Britain and France, the powers that financially controlled them, or side with Germany and Austria-Hungary, the Central Powers. The Ottomans chose the Central Powers. Why? Because they were already under British financial control. They had nothing to lose. Britain already owned them economically. At least with Germany, there was a chance to break free. They lost. In 1918, the Ottoman Empire was defeated. The Sultan signed the Armistice of Mudros, surrendering unconditionally, and then came the carve-up. In 1916, even before the war ended, Britain and France had already drawn up a secret agreement, the Sykes-Picot Agreement. Mark Sykes, a British diplomat, and François-Georges Picot, a French diplomat, sat in a room with a map and literally drew lines. This part goes to Britain. This part goes to France. This part becomes an international zone. They carved up the entire Middle East with rulers and pencils. No consideration for ethnic groups. No consideration for religious divisions. No consideration for historical boundaries. Just straight lines drawn by European diplomats who had never lived in the region. Iraq, created by Britain, combining 3 Ottoman provinces that had nothing in common. Syria and Lebanon, given to France. Palestine, placed under British mandate. Transjordan, created as a buffer state. The Arabian Peninsula divided into Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Oman, and the Gulf states. Every single border in the modern Middle East was drawn by European creditors dividing up the collateral. And here's the key. This wasn't a military conquest. This was a debt collection. The Ottoman Empire didn't fall because European armies were stronger. It fell because European banks were smarter. They lent money the Ottomans couldn't repay. They waited for the default. They took financial control. Then they waited for a crisis, World War I, to complete the takeover. The entire process took 60 years. From the first loan in 1854 to the final collapse in 1918. 60 years of slow, methodical financial strangulation. And it cost Britain almost nothing. The loans were profitable. The interest payments more than covered the defaults. And in the end, they got the entire Middle East, oil fields in Iraq, the Suez Canal in Egypt, trade routes, strategic positioning. All of it acquired through debt, not war. Now let's talk about how this exact playbook is being used today. Because the Ottoman debt trap wasn't a one-time historical event. It's the blueprint for modern financial imperialism. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank use the same tactics. A developing country needs infrastructure, roads, ports, power plants. They don't have the capital. The IMF or World Bank offers a loan. Low interest at first. The country takes it, builds the infrastructure. But the loan comes with conditions, structural adjustment programs, privatize state industries, open markets to foreign investment, cut government spending, devalue the currency. The country implements the conditions. The economy suffers. Revenue drops. They can't repay the loan. They default. The IMF steps in with a bailout, more loans, harsher conditions, more privatization, more foreign control. And eventually, the country loses sovereignty over its own economic policy. Greece went through this in 2010. The European Central Bank and IMF bailed out Greece, but imposed austerity so harsh that Greek voters lost control of their own budget. European technocrats decided Greek spending. Argentina has defaulted 9 times. Each time, the IMF loans them back into dependency. This is the Ottoman playbook. Loan, default, control. China is doing the same thing right now with the Belt and Road Initiative. China loans billions to developing countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America to build infrastructure, ports, railroads, highways. The loans are huge. The terms seem generous, but the countries can't repay. Sri Lanka borrowed over $1 billion from China to build Hambantota Port. They couldn't repay. In 2017, Sri Lanka handed the port to China on a 99-year lease. China now controls a strategic port on one of the world's busiest shipping lanes. They acquired it through debt. Djibouti, a tiny country in East Africa, owes China over $1 billion. Their entire GDP is only $3 billion. They're mathematically insolvent. China now has a military base in Djibouti. Pakistan owes China over $60 billion through the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. They can't repay. China is acquiring control of Pakistani infrastructure, ports, and potentially military access. This is the debt trap, the same trap that destroyed the Ottoman Empire. And it works because debt is invisible. When Britain loans you money, it doesn't look like colonization. It looks like partnership. Until you can't pay, then the terms change. And by then, it's too late. Here's why debt is more powerful than military conquest. Armies are expensive. You have to pay soldiers, supply them, transport them, occupy territory, face rebellions, manage populations. It costs a fortune and generates resentment. Debt is cheap. You loan money, collect interest. If they pay, you profit. If they don't pay, you take assets. No soldiers needed, no occupation costs, no international backlash, just foreclosure. And debt is self-enforcing. When you owe money, you police yourself, you cut your own spending, you tax your own people, you enforce the conditions. The creditor doesn't have to do anything, the debtor does the work. This is why Britain destroyed the Ottoman Empire with debt instead of war. It was cheaper, easier, and more effective. And the modern financial system is built on this exact principle. Let me show you the mechanism. When a country takes a loan, it's taking a claim on future revenue. The loan must be repaid with tax income. But if the loan is bigger than future revenue, the country can't pay. They have 3 options. 1, default and lose access to credit. 2, print money and cause inflation. 3, take another loan to pay the first loan. Most countries choose option 3. This creates the debt spiral. Each new loan is bigger because it includes interest on the old loan. Eventually, the debt exceeds the country's ability to ever repay. At that point, the creditor has complete leverage. They can demand anything, privatize assets, change laws, open markets, surrender sovereignty. And the debtor has no choice, because default means economic collapse. This is the trap. And once you're in it, there's no escape. The Ottomans couldn't escape. Modern countries can't escape. The system is designed to be inescapable. So what do? How do you avoid the debt trap, whether as a country, a business, or an individual? 3 strategies. 1, never borrow more than you can repay from productive activity. The Ottomans borrowed to cover deficits and fund wars. That's destructive debt. If you borrow to build something that generates revenue, that's productive debt. A business loan to buy equipment that increases output is productive. A mortgage on rental property that generates income is productive. A payday loan to cover expenses is destructive. The rule is simple. Only borrow if the borrowed capital produces more value than the interest cost. If it doesn't, don't borrow. 2, understand the terms and the leverage. When the Ottomans took their first loan in 1854, they didn't understand they were entering a system designed to create dependency. They thought they were solving a short-term problem. They didn't see the long-term trap, read the terms, understand the interest, calculate the total repayment, know what happens if you default. If the terms give the creditor control over your assets or decisions, don't take the loan. Sovereignty is more valuable than capital. 3, build alternative systems. The Ottomans were dependent on European banks because they had no alternative. If they had developed domestic capital markets, internal financing, and self-sufficient revenue systems, they wouldn't have needed European loans. Countries, businesses, and individuals need alternatives to debt. Save capital, build reserves, create multiple income streams, develop relationships with multiple creditors, so no single creditor has total leverage. Diversification is protection. The reason Britain could destroy the Ottomans is because the Ottomans had no other option. If you have options, you have power. If you have no options, you're trapped. Here's what makes the Ottoman debt trap different from other imperial conquests. The Romans conquered with legions. The Mongols conquered with cavalry. The Spanish conquered with conquistadors. All of them used military force, visible, violent, resistible. The British conquered the Ottomans with ledgers, bonds, interest rates, invisible, financial, inescapable. You can fight an army. You can't fight a balance sheet. You can resist occupation. You can't resist mathematics. When the debt exceeds your revenue, you've already lost. The Ottomans realized this too late. They signed the Muharrem Decree in 1881, thinking they were buying time. They were signing their death warrant. Within 40 years, the empire was gone, erased, replaced by nations created by creditors. And every border, every conflict, every instability in the modern Middle East traces back to that moment, when European bankers drew lines on a map to divide the collateral. The lesson isn't just historical, it's immediate. Right now, countries are taking loans they can't repay. Right now, creditors are positioning for the defaults. Right now, the next round of debt traps is being set. And the targets aren't just countries, it's businesses, it's individuals, it's you. Credit card debt in America is over $1 trillion. Student loan debt is over $1.7 trillion. Mortgage debt is over $12 trillion. Auto loans are over $1.5 trillion. The average American household owes over $150,000. Most of that will never be fully repaid. It will be refinanced, restructured, rolled over, just like the Ottomans. And every month, interest payments flow from debtors to creditors, extracting wealth, concentrating power, building leverage. This is the system. The same system that destroyed the Ottoman Empire is running right now in your life. If this video showed you how debt is used as a weapon, how empires are destroyed financially, and how the modern world is built on the same system that carved up the Middle East, do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe to the Wealth Records, share this with anyone who thinks debt is just a financial tool, because debt isn't neutral, it's a weapon. And if you don't understand how it's used, you're the target.